beneath the ivy-clad walls of Blackwood University's library. A secret festered for 3 decades, a truth bound by chains, decay, and the brittle pages of a book no one was meant to read. The sledgehammer struck brick, and the wall crumbled like old bone. Dust motes swirled in the beam of Rick Dalton's flashlight as he peered into the void. Behind him, Javier, the rookie laborer, gagged at the smell. A sour blend of mildew and something metallic, like blood left to rust. "Hell's that?" Javier muttered, but Rick didn't answer. His light trembled as it traced a spiral staircase descending into pitch-black nothingness. They weren't supposed to find it. The library renovation was routine. New wiring, fresh paint. But when Rick's boot hit the bottom step, the beam of his flashlight caught a shape. A skeletal hand, parchment-thin skin clinging to bone, curled around a leather-bound journal. Chains, thick and corroded, coiled around the corpse's ankles, bolting it to a table stained black with age. Javier's scream echoed off the walls as Rick's radio crackled. "You guys seeing this?" A voice hissed from upstairs, distorted as if the static itself were choking. The police arrived within minutes. The victim, they said, was Clara Harlow, a Blackwood student who vanished in 1989. Her thesis? Medical ethics in the 20th century? Detective Mara Foss flipped through Clara's journal in the cold glare of the precinct. The pages crackled like dead leaves. The ink faded but legible. October 12th, 1989. Dr. Whitlock knows. He followed me tonight. Her stomach twisted. Dr. Elias Whitlock, Dean Emeritus, donor of the library's rare books wing, now a recluse in his crumbling Gothic estate on the edge of campus. Clara's entries spiraled. She'd uncovered records from Whitlock's early career. Experimental drug trials on orphans at St. Agnes' Home. Project Lazarus, he'd called it. A miracle stimulant to revive coma patients. But the children never woke up. They seized, their veins turning black, before dying in agony. Whitlock buried the records. Buried them here, Clara wrote, beneath the library's foundation. A Polaroid slipped from the journal. Clara, her face gaunt under a flickering bulb, clutched a file labeled Lazarus. Behind her, a shadow loomed, tall, gaunt, one skeletal hand gripping a syringe. Mara shouldn't have gone back alone, but the journal's final entry clawed at her. "If you're reading this, he's still out there. Don't trust thee." The sentence ended mid-word, the page torn. At 2 a.m., the library's motion sensor lights flickered as Mara descended into the basement. Her flashlight beam danced over the table where Clara's corpse had been found. The chains now coiled on the floor like dead snakes. A draft hissed through the vents, carrying a sound, whimpering, not human. Smaller, younger. The flashlight died. Mara froze. Her phone's glow bathed the room in pallid light, and that's when she saw them. Tiny handprints, black and oily, smearing the walls. The air turned frigid. A chain clinked behind her. "You shouldn't have come back," a voice rasped. Whitlock stood in the doorway, his silhouette hunched, a syringe glinting in his claw-like hand. Mara's pulse roared. He lunged, but she sidestepped, her boots slipping on something wet. The floor was slick with a dark liquid pooling from the vents. Not water. The metallic stench hit her. Blood. They never left. Whitlock wheezed, his eyes wild. The children. They're in the walls. In the drug, he jabbed the syringe at her. Clara tried to silence them too. But the silence, it's worse. Mara scrambled backward, her hand closing around a rusted pipe. She swung. The crack of bone echoed. Whitlock crumpled, his breath gurgling. But as Mara turned to flee, the vents erupted with screams, high-pitched, desperate. The walls breathed, bulging as tiny hands pressed against the plaster. The coroner ruled Whitlock's death a suicide. A note, they said, confessed to Clara's murder. The children made me do it. It read. Marat's report omitted the hands, the screams, the way the blood seeped back into the vents, vanishing by dawn. The library reopened, polished and modern. Students joke about the ghost in the basement as they swipe their eyes past the new security gates. But the night crew quits every few weeks. They complain about the vents, how they hiss like children crying, how the motion sensors trigger at 3:33 a.m., filming static-filled footage of an empty study carrel, its chair rocking gently, and if you press your ear to the foundation, you'll hear it. The faint scratch of a pen, frantic, unending. Clara's journal was never found. I never intended to become entangled in the Westlake University disappearances. I was just a journalism student looking for a compelling story for my senior thesis. But after what I found, after what happened to Megan, I can't stay silent anymore. The police reports are incomplete. The university statements are lies. And someone needs to document what really happened in the Roscoe Library's back room before it happens again. It began on October 17th last year, a Tuesday night, unseasonably cold. The campus had that peculiar emptiness that comes with midterm season. Students either locked in their dorms studying or huddled in the 24-hour library. Megan Chen, a junior biochemistry major with a 3.9 GPA, was among the latter. Security footage shows her entering the library at 8:47 p.m., wearing a gray Westlake hoodie and carrying her distinctive yellow backpack. I've watched that footage so many times now that I've memorized every detail. How she pulls her student ID from the front pocket of her jeans. How she adjusts her glasses before scanning in. How she smiles briefly at the security guard, Alan Denvers. That same footage shows her studying at a corner table on the third floor until 1:32 a.m. She packs her things, stands up, stretches. Her phone screen illuminates. A text message. She reads it, types back quickly, then walks not toward the main exit, but toward the back of the floor, to an unmarked door used by library staff to access the cataloging room. At 1:34 a.m., Megan Chen opens that door and steps inside. She never comes out. Not through that door. Not through any door in the building. Not through any exit captured by the university's extensive security system. By noon the next day, Megan's roommate had reported her missing. By evening, campus police were reviewing the footage. By midnight, the real police had taken over. I remember the whispers spreading through campus like a virus. A girl vanished inside a library. How was that possible? The prevailing theory was camera malfunction. She must have left through some blind spot in the security system. But Detective Sandra Wilkes, lead investigator, wasn't satisfied with that explanation. The timestamp on the third floor camera jumps from 1:34 a.m. to 1:39 a.m. She told reporters, 5 missing minutes. We're treating this as a potential kidnapping. I knew Megan, not well, but we'd shared a comparative literature class the previous semester. She wasn't the type to disappear voluntarily. Driven, focused. Already accepted to 3 top medical schools for after graduation, when the university held a candlelight vigil 3 days after her disappearance. I went, standing silently among hundreds of students, while her parents clutched each other near the podium, their faces hollow with grief. That's when I decided my thesis would investigate her disappearance. I began by interviewing library staff. Most refused to talk, citing the ongoing investigation. But one student worker, Bailey Thompson, agreed to meet me for coffee off campus. There's something weird about that cataloging room, Bailey said, voice low despite the noisy cafe around us. None of the student workers are allowed inside, only full-time staff with special clearance. Why? She shrugged. They say it's for preserving rare manuscripts. But she leaned closer. 2 nights before Megan disappeared, I was shelving books on the 3rd floor around midnight. I heard sounds coming from inside that room, like scraping, metal on stone, and voices really faint. When I told my supervisor, he said it was just the ventilation system. Did you believe him? Bailey stared into her coffee. No. The next day I saw them bringing in large equipment. Industrial stuff, covered in tarps, through the service entrance at 3 a.m. I only saw because I was pulling an all-nighter in the 24-hour study room across the quad. I tried accessing the cataloging room myself. The door was always locked. When I asked about it directly, the head librarian, Dr. Harrison, told me it was strictly off-limits due to ongoing renovations and sensitive materials. 3 weeks into my investigation, the police reached a breakthrough. The detective leading the case received an anonymous tip about unusual activity in an abandoned research building half a mile from campus. Originally part of Westlake's medical school, Parsons Hall had been shut down in the 1990s after funding cuts. What they found there changed everything. A maintenance worker, clearing overgrowth around Parsons Hall, discovered fresh footprints leading to a basement window that had been recently forced open. Police found evidence someone had been living there. Food wrappers, a sleeping bag, and most disturbingly, pictures of female students taken from a distance. Among them were several of Megan, but it was what they found in the basement that connected everything. Behind a false wall, a tunnel, old, brick-lined, and stretching into darkness. The entrance had been recently cleared of decades of debris. I learned this from Detective Wilkes herself, who agreed to speak with me after I showed her my growing file of evidence. The tunnel appears to be part of an old network that connected campus buildings in the early 1900s, she explained. Most were sealed off in the 70s for safety reasons. But this one, she paused, choosing her words carefully. This one leads directly to the foundation of the library. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. To the cataloging room, she nodded grimly. We're executing a search warrant tomorrow morning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Megan, about that unmarked door, about the 5 missing minutes of footage. At 2 a.m., I made a decision that I still don't fully understand. I got dressed, grabbed my recorder and flashlight, and headed to campus. The library was still open. Midterms week meant 24-hour access. The security guard at the entrance barely glanced at my ID. I headed straight to the 3rd floor, which was nearly empty. Just 2 students dozing over textbooks near the entrance. I walked to the back, to that unmarked door. For several minutes, I just stood there, listening. At first, nothing. Then, a faint rhythmic sound. Not scraping, but tapping. Deliberate. Like Morse code. And underneath it, almost imperceptible, a sound like weeping. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I tried the handle, locked as expected. But as I leaned closer to listen again, I noticed something I hadn't before. The door frame didn't quite meet the floor. A thin gap, maybe half an inch, showed at the bottom. And from that gap came a faint glow. Not electric light. Something different. Warmer. Flickering. I lay on the floor, ignoring how ridiculous I must look if anyone saw me, and peered through the gap. What I saw made no sense. No cataloging room. Instead, a stone staircase spiraling downward, illuminated by what looked like gas lamps mounted on the wall. The tapping grew louder, then stopped. A face appeared in the gap, upside down from my perspective, peering out. Eyes red-rimmed, face gaunt. A woman's face, but not Megan's. She saw me. Her chapped lips moved, forming 2 words. Help us. Then fingers appeared in the gap. Thin, dirty, pushing something through. A small folded paper. I grabbed it and scrambled backward, just as I heard keys in the lock. I ran down the stairs, past the security desk, out into the night. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, lungs burning, legs weak, With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper. A list of names, dates, and student ID numbers. 12 names total. Megan's was 9th on the list, dated 10/17. The first date was from 2017, the most recent just 1 week ago. Next to each was a purpose: cognitive, sensory, limbic, and so on. Next to Megan's, memory extraction. At the bottom in different handwriting: Parsons project never ended. Tunnel connects to sub-basement lab. Dr. Harrison oversees. Campus police involved. Trust no one. I called Detective Wilkes immediately, but got her voicemail. I left a rambling message about what I'd seen, about the list. I emailed her photos of the paper from multiple angles. Then I waited. Morning came. No response from Wilkes. I tried calling the precinct, only to be told she had taken a personal day, unusual for the middle of a high-profile investigation. I went to campus, intending to go directly to the city police. But as I approached the library, I saw the commotion. Police cars, an ambulance, yellow tape. A crowd had gathered, phones raised, recording. What happened? I asked a bystander. Some guy broke into the library last night, he said, not looking away from the scene. Security guard shot him. They're saying he might be connected to that missing girl. My blood turned to ice. What guy? Did they identify him? He shrugged. Heard he was some homeless dude living in one of the abandoned buildings. Had her ID on him or something. On a stretcher, they were wheeling out a body bag. Behind it, walking with the officers, was Dr. Harrison, and beside him, Detective Wilkes. As if sensing my gaze, Wilkes looked up. Our eyes met across the crowd. Her expression didn't change, but she touched her ear and then subtly shook her head, a warning. That afternoon, the university president held a press conference. They had solved the case of Megan Chan. The suspect, now deceased, was a former maintenance worker with mental health issues who had been living in the tunnel system. He had apparently used his old keys to access restricted areas, including the library cataloging room in his makeshift home in Parsons Hall. They found Megan's student ID and backpack, along with evidence of foul play. The investigation was ongoing, but they believed he was responsible for her disappearance and probable death. Case closed, except it wasn't. The next day, Detective Wilkes was removed from the case, reportedly to handle a major drug bust across the state. The paper I'd received vanished from my apartment while I was in class. My recorder, with the sounds I'd heard through that door, was corrupted, just static when I tried to play it back. I tried accessing public records about the Parsons project, only to find all related documents had been sealed by court order in 1997. National security, they claimed. 3 days later, I was called to the dean's office. My academic advisor was there, along with a university lawyer. They were concerned about my mental health following the trauma of losing a classmate. They strongly suggested I take a medical leave. My advisor reminded me how a psychiatric hold might affect my scholarship and future job prospects. The message was clear. I withdrew my thesis proposal the next day. Officially, I'm now writing about digital media ethics. I attend classes, keep my head down. To anyone watching, I've moved on. But every night, I return to the library. I sit on the 3rd floor, pretending to study, watching that unmarked door. Sometimes I hear the tapping. Sometimes, in the silences between, I swear I hear voices. Megan's might be among them. Last week, they finally reopened the cataloging room. I managed to glimpse inside as a staff member exited. Just ordinary shelves, filing cabinets. No staircase, no gas lamps. But on the floor, just visible before the door swung shut, was a modern metal trapdoor, secured with an electronic keypad. I started receiving texts from an unknown number, just coordinates. Different ones each time. When I mapped them, they mark locations of abandoned buildings across the county, all former research facilities. And yesterday slipped under my apartment door, a yellowed ID badge from 1992, Parsons Project. The photo shows a younger Dr. Harrison, his name in a subtitle that makes my skin crawl. Neural Extraction Division. I don't know what happened to Megan Chen. I don't know what's happening beneath our university, but I know this. Someone is still down there. Still tapping. Still hoping someone will hear. If I go missing, look for the tunnels. Look for the names. And whatever you do, don't trust the official story. Because some things are worse than disappearing. Some things are worse than death. Sometimes they keep you. Libraries are supposed to be safe. A sanctuary of whispered pages and hushed footsteps. But in the labyrinthine stacks of Harlow Public Library, one wrong turn could mean never being seen again. The security camera footage was grainy, but unmistakable. Emily Torres, 22nd, her oversized sweater swallowing her frame, squinted at a map of the library's third floor. Shelves towered around her like monoliths, the fluorescent lights flickering. A man emerged from the shadows. Mid-40s, salt and pepper stubble, a faded staff lanyard swinging from his neck. Lost? He asked, smiling. Emily nodded. Follow me? She did. He led her past the mythology section, through a door marked archives. Authorized personnel only. The camera caught her pause, the man's hand gently guiding her elbow. The door shut. Emily never walked out. Her phone was found 3 weeks later, wedged beneath a bookshelf in the true crime aisle. The screen was cracked, smudged with fingerprints that didn't match hers. The last message, unsent, glowed in the precinct's evidence room. Help me, he has a key to the... Detective Marcus Cole replayed the footage. The man's lanyard was a fake. No employee named Martin Lowe existed. But the key in the message gnawed at him. He returned to the library at midnight. The building silent except for the hum of dormant scanners. The archive's door creaked open. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched into darkness. Cole's flashlight caught something on the floor. Strands of Emily's auburn hair knotted around a broken heel. And beyond a metal door, rust bleeding from its hinges, a keyhole. The lock gave way with a groan. The room stank of ammonia and wet paper. Cole's beam swept over a desk, cluttered with microfilm reels, a cot stripped bare, and a corkboard pinned with photos. Dozens of them. Women, all young, all dark-haired, all last seen in libraries across 3 states. Newspaper clippings chronicled their vanishings. Click. Cole froze. The sound came from the corner. A slide projector, its lens cracked. He pressed the button. The first image, Emily, gagged, her eyes wide as the flash erupted. Behind her, a wall of bookshelves, each labeled not with genres but dates. 2009, 2012, 2015. The projector advanced, Emily struggling against duct tape. Emily curled on the cot. A book splayed open on her lap. The final slide, her face streaked with tears, finger pressed to her lips. Shh. The door slammed. Cole's radio died. The projector whirred, cycling through the slides faster now. The click, click, click merging into a frenzied stutter. Shadows lunged across the walls. He threw his shoulder against the door, but something held it. A chain, a lock he couldn't see. Then a voice whispered through the vent above. Librarians never share their secrets. Cole's flashlight failed. In the strobe of the projector, he saw him. The man from the footage, standing inches away, a bone-handled letter opener glinting in his hand. She shouldn't have screamed, he sighed. Books are for keeping quiet. The blade swung. Cole ducked, slamming the projector into the man's chest. The bulb exploded, plunging the room into blackness. They found Cole at dawn, unconscious in the archives. His notes shredded. The photos, the projector, the cot, gone. Only Emily's shoe remained. The case went cold. But librarians at Harlow quit one by one. They complain about the 3rd floor, how the archives door drifts open at night, how the microfilm machines whir on their own, projecting faint, flickering images of women, mouthing silent words, and late-night patrons swear they've seen Emily. She's always in the true crime aisle, her face a pale smudge behind the shelves, placing a single book back on the rack. Its due date slip, stamped overdue in red. Every night for the rest of your life. Libraries are supposed to be quiet places. Peaceful, predictable, safe. That's why Margaret Hale had worked at the Hawthorne Public Library for over 20 years. She liked routine. She liked the order of things. Books neatly stacked. Patrons checking in and out like clockwork. Until one day, a single overdue book shattered all of that. It was a rare, leather-bound edition of Anatomy of Human Atrocities, a grim, academic text that had been sitting in the library's archives for decades. No one had checked it out for years, until 6 weeks ago. The borrower? A man named William Kent, except Margaret had never seen him before. And now, he was 2 weeks overdue. Margaret had called. No answer. Emailed. Nothing. The library's policy was clear. After a certain period, they needed to confirm the status of borrowed items. Most of the time, it was a simple mistake. People forgot, moved, or just never cared. But when Margaret searched the address William Kent had provided, something didn't add up. It was an empty lot. At least that's what it looked like on Google Maps. But when she checked city records, the property had a structure listed. Someone had lived there. Recently, Margaret took her librarian's logbook and drove to the address after work. It was a dilapidated house standing alone at the end of Sycamore Street. The windows were boarded up, the front yard overgrown with weeds. The door was chained shut, and there was a smell, a deep, rancid stench that seeped into her nostrils even from the sidewalk. It was the kind of rotting smell she couldn't quite place. But instinct told her it wasn't food. Something was wrong. Margaret hesitated, but then she saw it. A thin strip of paper wedged between the boards on the door. She pulled it out. It was a library slip, stamped with the exact date the book had been checked out. Her stomach twisted. Someone had been here. And now, they weren't. The back door was unlocked. Margaret didn't want to go inside. But something, curiosity, fear, duty, pushed her forward. The air was thick with decay. Flies buzzed lazily against the walls. The floorboards creaked under her weight. And then she saw it. On a small wooden table, covered in a thick layer of dust, the book, still open, pages yellowed, the spine cracked, as if someone had been reading it over and over. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the chair beside it. The chair with leather straps bolted to the arms and legs. The chair that still had skin stuck to it. Margaret's breath hitched. Someone had been tied here, recently. A sound, a shuffling noise, like something moving beneath her. Margaret froze. Then she saw it. The basement door, slightly ajar. A set of stairs leading down into darkness. She should have left, called the police. But then she heard it, a whisper. Soft, broken. Help me. Margaret's legs moved before her brain could catch up. She descended the stairs, gripping the railing as the smell of blood and rot grew stronger. And then, the light bulb flickered, and she saw them, a man, thin, pale, slumped against the wall, his wrists raw from struggling. His eyes flicked up. William Kent? His lips trembled. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Then Margaret saw what was on the floor beside him. A severed hand, fingers curled as if frozen mid-scream. And next to it, a notebook, pages filled with cramped handwritten text. Margaret picked it up, hands shaking. She flipped to the last entry. He won't let me leave. I only wanted the book, but he saw me. He said I could help him, that I could be part of the research. I can still hear them in the walls. The others, they never stopped screaming. Margaret staggered back. That's when she noticed. The walls weren't solid. They were plasterboard, uneven and haphazardly placed. like someone had covered something up. She moved forward, pressing a hand against the surface, and then a soft thud, like flesh shifting behind it. Then they never found the man who lived behind the walls at Blackwood Memorial Library, but they found what he left behind. I'm writing this account now, 6 months after I discovered the room, because my therapist says it might help with the nightmares. The police report is public record, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It can't explain the small, inexplicable sounds I still hear whenever I'm alone in quiet places. It can't convey the feeling of knowing someone has been watching you, studying you, for months without your knowledge. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was the night security guard at Blackwood Memorial Library for 3 years, from 2019 until early 2023. The library itself is a massive Gothic revival structure built in 1887. The pride of our small Massachusetts town. 3 floors of towering bookshelves, reading rooms with leather chairs, and hidden alcoves perfect for studying. The basement housed the archives, temperature-controlled rooms filled with local historical documents and rare books. The night shift wasn't exactly coveted. 10 hours alone, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. in a century-old building full of creaking pipes and settling foundations. But I needed the job. I was halfway through my master's in library science, and the position came with tuition assistance. Besides, I liked the solitude. After the chaos of undergraduate dorms, the library's midnight quiet felt like a refuge, until I started noticing things. It began with small inconsistencies. Books rearranged in sections I'd checked the night before. Coffee mugs in the staff room sink that hadn't been there during my evening rounds. A window unlocked in the reference section that I distinctly remembered securing. I chalked it up to day staff oversights. Libraries are busy places. Things get overlooked. Then came the sounds. 3 months into my employment, I started hearing what sounded like soft footsteps on the 4th floor mezzanine. The problem? Blackwood only had 3 floors. The sounds always stopped when I approached. I mentioned it to Margaret, the head librarian, who smiled kindly and explained that old buildings talk to you after a while. Wait until winter, she said. When the pipes freeze and thaw, you'll swear someone's having a conversation upstairs. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. On my 1-year anniversary at Blackwood, I found the first concrete evidence that something was wrong. During my 2 a.m. rounds, my flashlight caught a glint of something under a study table in the northwest corner of the 2nd floor. It was an empty granola bar wrapper, not unusual in itself. Patrons snuck food in despite the rules, but this particular corner had been empty all day. I'd walked past it at least 4 times since the library closed. The wrapper was still warm. I immediately did a full building sweep. Every floor, every room, every closet. Nothing. I even checked the roof access and emergency exits. All secure. That night, I wrote it off as my own oversight and tried to forget about it. But similar incidents kept happening. A half-empty water bottle appearing in the American history section. A pencil rolling across the floor when no one was near it. The distinct smell of aftershave in the archives, where no patrons had been all day. I started keeping a journal, documenting every unexplained occurrence. After 2 months, I had 14 separate incidents. Too many to be coincidental. I considered telling Margaret but feared being labeled paranoid. Instead, I began my own investigation. I started by reviewing the building blueprints stored in the archives. What I found was unexpected. The original 1887 plans showed more rooms than currently existed. An entire section between the western stacks and the outer wall appeared to have been walled off during renovations in the 1940s. When I compared the exterior dimensions to the interior layout, there was a discrepancy of about 15 feet, enough space for a significant room. On my next shift, I examined the western wall of the 2nd floor more carefully. The bookshelves there were built-ins, stretching from floor to ceiling. They looked identical to others throughout the library, but something about them felt different. The books were less frequently accessed. Obscure philosophical with the scent of aging ink and the hushed ghosts of countless stories whispered from the shelves. In the hushed cathedral of books, dust motes danced in the slanting sunbeams, each mote a tiny fleeting spotlight on the untold narratives lining every wall, every alcove. Stories whispered from the spines, promises of adventure, knowledge, romance, terror, and secrets. Secrets hid in plain sight, tucked between brittle pages, pressed into faded cloth bindings, waiting patiently for the right eyes to fall upon them, the right fingers to brush against the truth. The boxes of donated books arrived in a rolling cart, smelling faintly of old paper and forgotten lives. They were the detritus of estates cleared out, attic cleanings, the unwanted remnants of lives lived and left behind. A routine intake for the librarian, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose life was interwoven with the quiet pulse of the library itself. Years of quiet dedication etched into the lines around her eyes and the gentle weariness in her smile. Just another Tuesday morning, another normal day of sorting, cataloging, returning order to the gentle chaos of donated volumes. She reached for a thick, cloth-bound volume near the bottom of the box. An older book, definitely. Heavier than expected, its heft oddly substantial in her hands. It felt different, not just old, but imbued with a certain weight, a silent gravity. Something about the rough texture of the cloth, the unexpectedly dense pages, a faint, musty odor clinging to it, a scent deeper and older than just paper and glue. The cover was a plain, unadorned brown cloth. No title embossed upon it, just the faintest hint of gilt lettering, now faded to a ghostly, indecipherable gold tracery along the spine. Curiosity piqued. Mrs. Gable carefully opened it. The pages within were yellowed with age, the paper thin and brittle, crackling softly as she turned them. She flipped through the initial chapters, a practiced librarian's eye scanning for what? Bookmarks left behind, annotations in the margins, annotations in the margins, dog-eared corners. Something inserted, something out of place, something hidden. And then her fingers brushed against something thicker, stiffer than the aged paper, tucked deep within the pages, pressed close to the book's spine, almost concealed within the gutter. Not a bookmark, not a pressed flower, not a receipt. Paper, definitely paper. Folded, thick, heavier than a stray page, handwritten upon. As she gently slid it free, a cold, unsettling tremor ran through her hand, a premonition of something unknown, something wrong. She pulled it out, unfolding the paper carefully, her librarian's instincts protecting the fragile artifact of unknown origin. The handwriting was cramped, spidery, almost illegible in places, a frantic, slanted script that raced across the aged paper. The ink, once black, had faded over time to a sepia-toned brown, but the words themselves remained stark, undeniable, leaping out from the page with chilling clarity. The first line of the handwritten text, a sentence that hung in the quiet air of, "Oh, I still remember you won't I. Oh, there you go, all." The library like a death knell, a confession. Mrs. Gable started reading, the library's quiet hum fading from her awareness, the rustling of pages turning into a distant whisper. The words blurred at first, swimming before her eyes, then sharpened with horrifying precision to chilling, undeniable clarity. Confession to murder. The word resonated in the silence, heavy with unspoken dread. Heavy with unspoken dread. The details were vague initially, rambling, disjointed, almost poetic in their darkness, weaving a tapestry of disturbed thoughts and fractured memories. Then, abruptly, disturbingly precise details began to emerge. Violent actions described with chilling detachment. Cold, clinical pronouncements of calculated cruelty. A name surfaced in the sprawling text, scrawled unevenly, as if the hand had faltered, wrestled with itself before committing the letters to paper. A date followed, precise, unyielding, and then a location, described vaguely at first, but with details that resonated, felt local sounding, familiar somehow, but just beyond the grasp of immediate recognition, lost in the fog of half-remembered town history, whispers of old tragedies and forgotten names. Something nagged at the edge of her memory. A half-formed shadow of unease, a prickle of recognition that she couldn't quite place. Not yet, she kept reading, drawn deeper into the confession against her will, repulsed by the raw darkness of the words, yet utterly fascinated by the chilling glimpse into a mind consumed by shadow. The confession deepened, twisted and turned through the pages, a labyrinth of guilt and justifications, of psychological games played with a victim whose name was still just a blurred shape on the page. Control, dominance, a chillingly detached observation of suffering. The killer's voice, raw and unfiltered on the aged paper, felt close, uncomfortably, terrifyingly close for comfort, as if the confessor were standing just behind her shoulder, breathing those dark words directly into her ear. Then, abruptly, the paragraph structure shifted. The rambling narrative focused, honed to a razor's edge. A specific detail emerged from the confession, suddenly vivid, shockingly clear and precise. A seemingly innocuous mention of the victim's clothing. A detail, distinctive, utterly unremarkable to the casual observer, yet rendered unforgettable by the context of the confession. A detail that sparked a sudden sharp click in Mrs. Gable's mind. A cold, horrifying connection slamming into place. Ice bloomed in her veins, spreading outward from her heart, chilling her to the core. 1980s. The whispered unease solidified into icy certainty. This detail, it resonated with something she'd heard, something she'd read, something that clung to the edges of local memory. 1980s. Unsolved case. Local girl. Sarah Jenkins, vanished without a trace one long hot summer. Her heart hammered a frantic tattoo against her ribs. The library's silence now amplifying the frantic rhythm of her own blood. Realization slammed into her. A physical blow that stole her breath. This wasn't just a story. This wasn't some elaborate piece of fiction, some morbid creative writing exercise. This was real, horribly, undeniably real. The weight of it settled upon her, crushing, suffocating. Goosebumps erupted on her arms, a cold wave washing over her, a chill that had nothing to do with the library's ever-present air conditioning. The letter went on, the details escalating in their chilling intimacy, their brutal honesty. A crime scene description unfolded on the page, stark and unflinching, brutal, intimate, rendered with a detached, almost clinical precision that was more terrifying than any dramatic flourish. And then, the mention of a specific, unremarkable object found near the body, an object that had never been released to the public, a detail meticulously recorded in the confession. A small, personal item, insignificant to anyone but the investigators and the killer. Details only the killer, or the police, could possibly know. Details that slammed the door shut on any lingering doubt. Hands trembling now, the fragile paper rattling in her suddenly unsteady grip. Mrs. Gable knew she had to stop reading, had to put it down, walk away, call someone, but she couldn't. Something held her captive, chained to the chilling words on the page, drawn in against her will by a morbid fascination, by the crushing weight of the confession laid bare in her trembling hands, by the dawning, sickening horror of what she now held. Not just a letter, but a life extinguished, a secret brutally confessed, a decision formed in her mind, cold and sharp as shards of ice. Police. She had to call the police immediately. But still, she hesitated. A flicker of doubt. A last-ditch attempt to rationalize the impossible. Prank? Could it be just an elaborate, cruel hoax? No, the details. Too specific, too intimate, too steeped in a chilling authenticity that no hoax could replicate. Too real. Time felt suddenly critical, pressing down on her with an unbearable urgency. What if, the thought, unbidden and terrifying, slithered into her mind? What if the killer was still? She shook her head sharply, dismissing the thought as ludicrous, irrational. But the fear, once awakened, lingered, a cold, insidious presence in the quiet library. Her hand trembled visibly as she reached for the phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed 911. Her voice, when she spoke to the dispatcher, was shaky, uneven, barely above a whisper, explaining the impossible. A confession found in a donated book, stumbling over words, trying to convey the chilling, almost unbelievable weight of the discovery in a dusty, cloth-bound volume. She could hear the skepticism in the dispatcher's initially detached tone, the polite disbelief. Then, as she repeated the victim's name, the date, the specific unreleased detail from the letter, a subtle shift in the dispatcher's voice, intrigue, a flicker of professional concern. Something changed. Detectives arrived with surprising speed. Uniformed officers filling the hushed spaces of the quiet library, disrupting the sacred peace with their heavy footsteps and hushed, urgent voices. Detective Miller, a man with weary eyes that seemed to have absorbed too much of the city's darkness, a face etched with the grim realities of his profession, took the letter from Mrs. Gable's shaking hand. He read it in silence, his expression hardening with each line, the weariness in his eyes deepening into a cold, professional focus. He questioned Mrs. Gable, his voice sharp and efficient, cutting through the library's silence with the precise questions of a seasoned investigator. Verifying details, cross-referencing against cold case files, still gathering dust in the archives. Old files were dusted off, retrieved from forgotten storage, the yellowed folders of the 1980s case. Local girl, Sarah Jenkins, vanished summer of '85. A massive search, community-wide mobilization, reward posters plastered across town. Nothing, no body, no clues. Case went cold, unsolved. A ghost haunting the town's collective memory for decades. Detective Miller compared the details in the handwritten letter against the faded police records, his expression growing grimmer with each passing moment. The letter's details, unsettlingly close to the original file records. Too close for coincidence. Impossibly close. The investigation reopened, quietly at first, whispers in the sterile corridors of the police station, then gaining momentum with each new piece of corroborating evidence. Faint photos, faded and grainy, witness statements, brittle with age. Old evidence meticulously re-examined under modern forensic technology. The object mentioned in the confession, the small personal item never released to the public. Photographic evidence in the old files confirmed its existence, its location precisely as described in the confession, beyond any shadow of a doubt. The letter, a genuine confession. The killer's voice, chillingly calm and detached, admitting guilt, describing the crime with a disturbing lack of emotion. A decades-old secret, unearthed not in a dusty archive, not through diligent police work, but from a randomly donated cloth-bound book, found in the quiet heart of the town library. The library, once a sanctuary of silence and stories, suddenly transformed into a crime scene, the hushed air now thick with unspoken horror. The scent of old paper now mingled with the phantom smell of something far more sinister. Silence, no longer peaceful, but heavy with unspoken dread, with the weight of a confessed sin. But the letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, mid-thought. Confession complete, crime meticulously detailed, guilt unequivocally admitted, but no name signed at the bottom of the page. Just a chilling, final sentence, scrawled unevenly at the very bottom edge of the paper. even more rushed and frantic than the rest of the spidery script. You'll never know why. Not just a confession of a crime committed in the distant past, but a taunt, a challenge thrown across the decades, something lingering, present, actively malevolent in those past words. That final line echoed in the unnerving silence of the library, a chilling whisper against the hushed reverence of the books, sending shivers down the spines of the hardened detectives, and lodging itself deep within Mrs. Gable's soul. You'll never know why. The meaning hung heavy in the air, unanswered, unsettling. A question mark etched in blood-red ink across the decades. The investigation intensified, frantic now, fueled by a desperate urgency to find the author of the confession, to understand the why behind the chilling words, behind the decades of silence, behind the book, behind the confession itself. The community, the once peaceful town of Silent Creek, stirred with a renewed unease, a creeping fear that whispered through the quiet streets, through the hushed aisles of the library. The ghost of Sarah Jenkins finally, after decades of silence, was screaming from the aged pages of a dusty cloth-bound book, unearthed from the silence of the town library. A confession in cloth-bound, a secret no longer silent. A secret no longer silent. But even with the confession in hand, the chilling mystery remained, unbroken. Who was the confessor? Why choose a library book as the vessel for such a dark secret? Why now? After all these years? Why this book? Why this library? Why no name? The killer, speaking from beyond the decades through the fragile paper of the confession, remained frustratingly, terrifyingly anonymous. The cold case, technically solved on paper, felt colder now, more deeply unsettling in its resolution, more haunted by the unanswered questions than it ever had been by the silence of the unsolved mystery. The book itself, cloth-bound and brown, after being meticulously examined, catalogued as evidence, and then processed, returned to the library's shelves, a silent artifact now, imbued with a chilling history, forever whispering its dark secret to anyone who dared to open its unassuming cover. The library, once a sanctuary of quiet stories, was forever changed, tainted by the weight of true crime, the chilling echo of a confession in cloth-bound. The quiet place now echoes with unspoken horror, with the haunting, unanswered why. And the dust motes still dance in the sunbeams, and the sunbeams still slant through the high windows. But something shifted in the silent air. The silence now watches too. The Pinewood Public Library sat squat and silent on the edge of town, its brick facade glowing faintly under a single street lamp. Sarah Kleiner, 35, leaned over the checkout desk, the clock ticking past 10 p.m. She'd been a librarian here for years, used to the hum of flickering lights and the groan of old shelves settling in the dark. Tonight, though, closing up alone, the air felt stale, thick with dust and something sour she couldn't place. She was locking the back office when a faint giggle slipped through the quiet, high-pitched, childish echoing from the children's section. Zara froze, a Keys Yangling in her hand. The library had emptied hours ago. She checked every corner. She grabbed her flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim stacks, and called out, "Hello? Hello?" The giggle stopped, replaced by the soft rustle of pages turning. Deliberate close. Down the hall, the children's nook glowed under a weak bulb. Bean bags, low shelves, a mural of grinning animals. There, cross-legged on the carpet, sat a little girl, maybe 6, in a faded blue dress, flipping through a picture book. Her blonde hair hung limp, framing a pale face smudged with dirt. Sarah's breath caught. "Hey, sweetie, what are you doing here?" The girl looked up, eyes big and glassy. "They left me here," she said, voice flat like she'd said it before. Sarah crouched, heart thudding. "Who left you?" "Your parents." The girl nodded, turning a page. Too slow, too calm. Where'd they go? Sarah pressed. Outside, the kid replied, pointing a grubby finger at the window, black beyond the glass. Sarah scanned the room. No bag, no coat, just the book. The rustle came again, pages flipping, though the girl's hands stayed still. She radioed security. Jim, the night guard. Gruff but reliable. Got a kid here. Alone. Can you check the lot? His voice crackled back. On it. Sarah sat with the girl, unease coiling tight. What's your name? The girl smiled, thin and sharp. Lily. No last name, no fuss. Just that smile. Cutting through the hum of the heater kicking on, a low drone that rattled the vents. Jim buzzed 10 minutes later. Lot's empty. No cars, no one. Pulling tapes now. Sarah kept Lily in sight. The kid's gaze drifting to the window, unblinking. The heater's drone sharpened, a metallic edge creeping in, like a nail tapping glass, steady and faint. Sarah's skin prickled. You sure they're outside, Lily? The girl nodded, still smiling, and pointed again, her finger trembling this time. The guard called back, voice tight. Tapes show her walking in. 6 p.m., front door. Alone. No adults, no drop-off. Been here 4 hours. Sarah's stomach dropped. That's impossible. I locked up at 8. Jim grunted. See for yourself. She left Lily with a coloring book and bolted to the security room, the tapping growing, rhythmic, insistent, bouncing off the walls. On the grainy screen, there she was. Lily, small and smudged, slipping through the entrance, head down. No one with her, no car in the lot. Sarah rewound. Nothing before, nothing after. The timestamp blinked. 3 p.m. She'd been shelving books then, 10 feet away, and hadn't seen a soul. The tapping swelled, loud enough to shake her focus, and Jim muttered, You hear that? She nodded, throat dry, back in the nook. Lily was gone. Book open. Crayons scattered like spilled teeth. Sarah's flashlight swept the room. Empty, but the window was cracked, cold air seeping in. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low creak, woods draining, slow and heavy from the stacks. She crept forward, beam shaking, and found a trail, smudged footprints, tiny, leading to the basement door. Always locked. She twisted the knob. Unlocked now, though she checked it at 9. The stairs descended into black, the creak echoing up, joined by a faint hum, like breath through a straw, uneven and wet. Sarah called down, Lily! No answer. Just the hum, growing thicker. She stepped back, slamming the door, when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then died, plunging the library into shadow. Her radio buzzed, Jim yelling, Get out now! She ran, the creak chasing her, swelling into a groan, metal bending, deep in the basement. The front door loomed, and she burst into the lot, Jim's truck screeching up. Saw someone, back exit, dragging a bag, he panted. Cops swarmed minutes later, finding the basement trashed, old files shredded, a kid's shoe in the corner stained dark. They pieced it fast. A drifter, Carl Wentz, ex-con, squatting down there for weeks. Lily, real name unknown. Lured in, abandoned by junkie parents months back. His bait for something worse. No sign of her. Just Wentz prints and a bag of stolen clothes. He'd slipped out as the lights failed. Gone before the net closed. Sarah quit, moved to Raleigh. But the library's shadow stuck. A month later, shelving books at her new gig, she froze. A giggle, high and sharp, floated from the kid's corner. She turned slow and saw her. Lily. Same dress, same smile, alone at a table, staring. Sarah blinked. She was gone. But the book she'd held was open. A single page torn out, blank, except for a smudged fingerprint, still wet.